it would take 1,000 Bible-sized books to write out the information in one of our cells.
Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. We have a tremendous program lined up for you. And our special guest is Dr. Jonathan Sarfati. Is that right? I'm trying to pronounce the name
yes,
correctly.
Perfect.
And
it's the Hebrew word Frenchman, okay? That's where the name comes from.
And also on the program with us is Matt Singleton.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Okay, and we recently saw a video on creationism, and it's called The Achilles Heel. That is tremendous, and we're going to try to show you excerpts from that, and it is very convincing. And the thing about it is, if evolution is not true, that changes everything.
Yeah.
Okay, it changes who we are, and that there is a God, and it does away with atheism, and it just changes your whole life. And as I was telling Matt earlier, it seems to me that this video, the take-home message that I got from it is that modern science has basically made evolution impossible.
And, that's one of the things that we usually think in terms of like, if we're talking about creation, you're talking about faith, and evolution is supposed to be talking about fact. But actually, the more that we've studied this, evolution is completely unfactual. It is not something to be true by any stretch of the imagination. There's just no longer any factual basis to believe in Darwinian molecules to man type of evolution.
Well, there's a point, because it's not really a science versus religion struggle. It's really a religion versus religion. You've got religion,
right,
evolution, humanism, versus the religion of biblical Christianity, the only real two basic religions we have, and the scientific evidence for one versus the scientific evidence for the other. And this video mainly concerns the scientific support there is for the creation account in the Bible and why evolution fails in so many different areas. That's why we have 9 different sections in that video covering aspects of natural selection, genetics, origin of life, non-living chemicals, fossils, radioactive dating, the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
So all these different grounds in sort of 10-minute bites with summary points, and there's a free study guide you can get online with to go through it with a study group of yours if you want to.
Yeah. It is tremendous. Now, I asked you earlier, and I'd like you to repeat about what do you think is the most important part of this video as far as convincing people that evolution is very hard to accept. It has to be taken by faith.
There's no such thing as a simple living thing. It's just not possible, because even the simplest living things have enormously complicated machinery, and also the instruction manual to build that machinery. And then you've got the interplay between the instructions and the machinery, because you need decoding machines to read the instructions, the information. And the huge problem is that the DNA codes for the instructions for its own decoding machines. So what came first? DNA doesn't mean anything unless you can read it, but you can't get the reading machines unless you have DNA instructions to build them.
And one of the things that, like, when I was studying this and some other information, the evolutionary model usually, some places still teach you today this idea of junk DNA, where most of the cell is supposed to be useless, and yet within that supposed junk DNA, we're finding a lot of these machines and stuff that you're talking about, like the ATP motors and the DNA.
Well, junk DNA, you see, because DNA is first transcribed into a similar molecule called RNA, and then sometimes that RNA is translated into proteins, and they thought, well, not much DNA is translated into proteins, so therefore the rest is junk. We find that about 90+% of the DNA is transcribed into RNA, which we find is part of the operating system of the cell. You couldn't have the cell unless you had the RNA regulating and controlling when a gene is read into the protein. You've got to control when it happens and how often it happens and which sequence it happens. The RNA actually does a lot to control it as a control program. So the idea of junk DNA is itself a junk concept. It's all doing something.
Well, let's just interject here a clip of the video to show these machines.
One of the most amazing information transfer systems in the cell involves the way proteins are encoded in and decoded from strands of DNA. Starting out with these long, fragile, sticky strings of DNA, an amazing machine called an RNA polymerase zips down the strand, opens up the coils, and copies the DNA into another molecule called RNA.
Okay. I just am very impressed with it. That's something I think is very easy to understand. And like you say, you cannot have the simplest living cell without all of this extremely complex machinery to make it work.
And Darwin didn't have any clue.
Yeah.
When his theory came out, these things were supposed to be very simple and primordial.
Yeah.
And to me, if this theory, it's over 150 years old and has so much of the government push, so much of our tax dollars being used with it, to me, if an idea is debunked like that, at a minimum, it needs to go to the back of the line.
Absolutely.
Well, it's true, because you see, Darwinism, they talk about natural selection, but see, natural selection requires reproduction because it means this thing is fitter than this thing needs more offspring. So you have to have something reproducing before you can even talk about natural selection. And as we show in the video, you cannot get to that first stage of self-reproduction. And therefore, natural selection is like runners on a starting line, they're all dead. You can't even get natural selection started unless you have the first living thing.
I think this
so Dawkins and Darwin are dead in the water.
Yeah, this is so important because really it proves that there is a God and that God created us, and that means that we need to obey God because He made us.
Well, that's actually the last section of our DVD is about the implication. What does it all matter? And we point out
right.
If God made us, he owns us and can make the rules for us. And He loves us, so He makes the rules for our good. But if God didn't make us, then anything goes. We are rearranged upon. And in fact, there's a video clip from the Nazi propaganda, a film reel, saying that we have sinned grievously against the law of natural selection by allowing handicapped people to live because they're lower than the beast. We shouldn't be allowing this. So Nazism, according to their own propaganda, was relying on Darwinian ideas of survival of the fittest and applying it to animals, to humans who are just other animals anyway. So this is what consistent evolution has did. In America, you had eugenics laws that sterilized 60,000 Americans against their will. So you had this before World War II in this country. So evolutionary ideas have been very destructive, as opposed to the flowering of culture, music, art, and even science under the Christian worldview of a divine lawmaker, a God of order, who's arranged an orderly universe and has commanded us to take dominion over it. So, in fact, science itself grew out of this Christian worldview, not out of an atheistic one.
Well, and something, I've been doing some of my private studies and stuff, and I found that all the leftist progressive agenda, really you can find it all descending one way or another back to Darwinism and back to the secular humanist worldview. But when I studied the founding fathers, even the most secular and the most liberal of the founding fathers were all by conviction, they were creationists, and that affected their view of human freedom. That's why we hold
our
these
Constitution.
we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights.
Well, and you look at
I guess the Declaration of Independence must be unconstitutional if you believe the Supreme Court these days, even though it said created equal. That would be regarded as unconstitutional now. But I've read it. I mean, I'm an Australian, but I've read some of your guys too. Like, even the most anti-Christian was Thomas Paine, but his book called Common Sense, he referred to the Bible. He gave the Bible example and expected his audience to also believe the Bible as his authority. Even he didn't believe the Bible, but he expected his audience to believe the Bible. So he appealed to biblical examples against why kings are bad.
Right.
and appeal to the fallen nature of man, you see. That's why we need checks and balances and avoiding too much power in hand, because all people are fallen and capable of evil, so we have to restrict their ability to have too much power. That was unique in the American experiment, basically.
The other thing that I thought was very powerful about your video is the idea that they have never been able to make a living organism from inorganic chemicals or any kind of chemicals, and that they end up making just sort of like tar or something, and it's the wrong configuration as far as left-handed and right-handed molecules. And the whole thing is a total failure as far as trying to make something living from non-living material.
Well, that was actually my chapter in the book.
Oh, is that your chapter?
Yes.
That was very powerful.
And I noticed a remark you made talking about...
That's my favorite topic, yes.
The one thing it was talking about in the video, they want this to have happened, the biogenesis to have happened in the water because of the elements needed. But the problem is that in water, these molecules would tend to separate instead of stick together.
I mean, I'm a PhD chemist, and I know very well if you want to make proteins, you don't have water in your reaction. You try and avoid water. You're trying to have chemicals that actually extract water. You do everything you can to get rid of water. Any organic chemist who tried to make proteins in water would be laughed out of his lab. But now they tell you that the life began in the ocean. Just the last place you'd expect to find the polymerization reactions. And there, as you say, there's a video, an animation in the movie about this very thing.
Right. And, here again, that makes me come back to the book of Romans, the first chapter, where it says God is, you can see God in what he's made. And, you look at life or, the stars or whatever you want to look at, and you have God written all over it. And yet, like Matt was saying, they're taxing you and me or all of us to promote an anti-God worldview in our public schools, which is, that's the word. How could this crazy thing happen? The Second Chronicles 7:14 says, if my people are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways. Okay, and people say, well, I haven't done anything wicked. Well, the thing that we look the other way and let them take over the training of our children is the most wicked thing anyone could ever do, is to just look the other way and let them take over our public schools like that.
Well, it's interesting. We actually have a new DVD called Fallout, which is about why so many young people are leaving the church. And one of the reasons is that parents seem to be oblivious to the evolutionary teaching in the schools and even in a lot of the seminaries. Can you see that one all right?
Fallout, Fallout.
It's brand new. Yeah. And the thing is, if the church and the family are not countering the evolutionary confirmation, the kids are going to go by what they've been taught, and there's no wonder they leave the church.
Well, tell us now, if our listeners wanted to get this video, how would be the best way for them to get it?
Well, our website is creation.com. Very easy website to remember, creation.com.
Okay, and it's all on there.
Well, that's our general website, which has actually 11,000 plus articles on it, which is one thing about it. So it's not just the EAH, but I'm just going to type something. So if you go to creation.com/EAH, you'll get directly to the video page and the book page.
Okay, what is EAH?
Creation.com/EAH.
What's EAH stand for?
Evolution's Achilles heels.
Oh, Achilles. Okay.
Yep.
Well, that is, it basically has killed the theory of evolution.
Well, and one thing that people will find in the DVD is that even though there's a lot of material, it's very streamlined and efficient. They're not going out on a limb very much at all on anything, but everything is plank by plank, piece by piece.
And
shown that
it's
this
very
cannot
convincing.
work.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's stop just a minute and get into what you were talking about, how they tried to create life from non-life. That's another very powerful section. So let's take a look at that.
And for me as a chemist, the hardest problem for evolution is the origin of first life from non-living chemicals, and this is commonly called chemical evolution.
Most people have heard of the Miller-Urey experiment, and it's in most textbooks still today. They wanted to see if organic molecules could come from inorganic precursors. So they took some simple chemicals and they ran them through a spark chamber. And most of the products they got really amounted to nothing more than a brown tar, because random chemical reactions produced random molecules. And yeah, they found a few amino acids, but in a mixture of left and right-handed forms. But what they didn't find are certain specific amino acids that are critical for life. They didn't find nucleotides. They didn't find any large biomolecules.
To get living things, we need lots of huge molecules, and that means we have to get little molecules to combine into big molecules. Now, the problem is that chemicals don't react in that way. Everything I've learned in real chemistry shows that the reactions go in the opposite way from what's required for life to come from non-living chemicals.
I think that is so powerful, and it affects everything. I mean, you look at your fellow human being and say, oh, he's no good or something. Hey, he's made in the image of Almighty God, so I have to respect him. And I'm not going to hit him in the head with a brick or it's just so important. This is sort of the fundamental of all of life is who we are and where we came from.
Well, a couple of years ago, I got into a debate with a local politician around here. I think his name was Jeff Young. And basically, Jeff Young, he was arguing abortion, and I was arguing pro-life. And I just finally broke it down. I said, do you believe that mankind, came from an ape, which you go down and it just eventually came from a rock? And he's like, well, yes.
Yeah.
And now here's the thing. When we talk about the founding fathers, they didn't believe that when they said, that we have life and liberty and stuff like that, they didn't believe that we came from rocks, that we were separate, that life is something that comes from God.
Absolutely.
But when you get down to Roe versus Wade, they have an evolutionary definition of what life is. And that's why they say, well, it doesn't matter. It's just some chemicals. It's a fetus.
Yeah.
And even though fetus just means infant, and ultimately infant means baby, a lot of wordplay. That's the only thing left in evolution is wordplay. They try to find out words you don't know or give new definitions to words that didn't mean that when they first started working it out.
Right.
And the pro-abortion people never actually get to this science. The science says life begins at conception. This is a scientific fact, not a religious fact. This is science, that life begins at conception when you've got two halves of the DNA coming together to form the zygote, and you've got a new living organism right from that conception. This is science.
Doctor, could you say a little bit about genetic entropy and why is that important?
Well, this is very interesting because this was very much brought to the fore by Dr. John Sanford. He's a creationist. He also invented the gene gun. He was very prestigious at Cornell University. And what he has done, in fact, secular scientists have done this as well, is that every new generation of humans is producing about 100 new mutations or copy mistakes in the genome. And previously they thought that if you had one mistake per generation, that would be enough to cause extinction of humanity. But now we're finding 100 new mistakes. And so you've got evolutionists asking, why haven't we become extinct already?
Yeah.
And the thing is, the reason we haven't been around for hundreds of thousands of years, we've only been around for about 10,000 years. But still, it's a problem, and there's no way out of it. And the only way out of it is the second coming of Christ, because we cannot stop this happening. We cannot try to do eugenics procedures because we can't get 100 new mutations to eliminate everyone in the population. It just can't work.
Now, as I recall, he said that's why we get old and die. Did I understand him right about that?
That's at the individual level that we have mutations. That's why we get old and die. But the key thing is it's a generational thing. It's a species thing as well.
Yeah.
That the species is getting more mutations. So a newborn baby has 100 mutations that the parents didn't have.
If we talk about survival of the fittest, meaning that the fittest are the ones who basically reproduce the best, I don't see humanity as reproducing the best. We take so long to raise up children, and we don't reproduce nearly as much as the animal kingdom. And, the people would assume that we're the spirit.
It's a number of things that are born minus who dies, you see. So I don't see that as a problem, because things that have a high reproductive rate also have a high death rate. Is the net survival that matters.
Yeah.
Net ability to pass on to the next generation. Because humans have this long generation time, there's far lower infant mortality than in the animal kingdom, for instance, which is why humans actually do pretty well. But of course, if we're having all this population control stuff and abortion, that's harming our reproductive rate. It's not going to be good for the species.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you need people to make things and to think and to invent things and to work and to love.
Right.
But the population people think humans are mouths to feed, and that's all we are.
Right.
Or a pollute or a cancer on the planet. That's what some of them say, that we should be. There are evolutionists who say that we should be killing people to reduce the population.
Right. Now, another thing that impressed me in the video is it says information is essential for life, and you must have language and networks to send it through, and meaningful information. And could you comment on all of that and how that also points to creation and not evolution?
Well, see, information is basically a third fundamental quantity. It's not matter or energy. If you think about it, for instance, if you wiped your hard drive on your computer, it would not weigh any different. So information doesn't weigh anything, but it's still very important. And it turns out that even the simplest living cell, called the mycoplasma, has about 600 kilobytes of information to control the need for reproduction, information processing, getting all the molecules it needs to process food. And it must be incredibly compressed information, because to try to duplicate what it does in reproduction, it took 100 computers running 10 to 10 hours. 100 computers in parallel, over 100 computers, to duplicate what the simplest cell does. So you imagine the compression algorithm involved with the 600 kilobytes must be incredible. And we have about 3 gigabytes of information.
And does that go along with intelligent design, that there had to be some intelligence in order to design these living organisms?
Well, the intelligent design people are right about that. I mean, I totally agree with them. I've written a whole book on design called By Design. But the point is, the intelligent design movement doesn't go far enough because it lacks a history of the design. It also ignores the biblical teaching of the fall, which is why, see, Darwin was facing intelligent design people. He wasn't facing them with creationists.
Well,
and the point is, he could say, well, why would this fly be designed to hurt this other insect or something like that? I mean, why would you have something designed so it has to tear another thing apart? But the point is, if you have the fall, then you realize, well, God didn't originally design it to hurt another thing. That came about because of man's sin. But if you have an old earth belief, which is what most of his opponents did, you can't use that argument. So, in fact, they had no answer to Darwin's attacks against the bad design in the world, or apparent bad design, which we would say is the fall, is what produced that. And why do things become extinct? Did God not design it properly? Now, if you had the flood after the fall, then you understand why extinction has happened. But the intelligent design movement doesn't have that history. They won't have this history. So they're fighting their arguments with both hands tied behind their back.
I see.
And it was tried and failed in Darwin's day. Why would it do any better today?
Right. Well, and that's what it seems like when we look at the media, when they take God versus atheist or evolution versus creation. You know, young earth creationists, we're not allowed in the room. We're not allowed to make these arguments. We have somebody else who says, well, I don't believe in evolution and I do believe in God. And then, you have the atheistic argument come in. Well, why is all this evil happening? And they usually win right up until they say that. And then they kind of raise their hands up, God will work it out in the end. But, there's the curse. There is sin. There is catastrophes and stuff that happened as a result of sin.
Right.
Let me throw out something else, too, going back to the design and stuff like that when we're talking about evolution. Science, is supposed to be all about observation and experiments. But really, this is all about conclusions, and sometimes they rely on math a lot. However, not only are these guys not focused on experiments anymore, and they want to talk about math, but they don't want to talk about math when it comes to the probability of biological evolution.
And that's actually another thing in the video. I go through a probability calculation. For instance, getting the simplest living things, you might need, say, 350 enzymes, which are special protein machines, okay?
Yes.
Now, the enzymes are made of 20 types of amino acids in a very specific sequence. So I calculate that even if you need only 10 of those enzymes right in each of the 300 plus enzymes, I calculate the probability would be like trying to guess a 5,000 digit PIN. We know how hard it is to guess a 4-digit PIN on your bank card. That's 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, right?
Yeah.
10 to the power 4. That's protection for you. But imagine if you had a 5,000 digit PIN. Who is going to get that by chance? It's impossible to get that by chance. But this is the probability we're talking about, is a 5,000 digit PIN type probability.
Right.
And that's being very generous to the evolutionists, assuming only 350 enzymes for life, and assuming only 10 of the building blocks had to be right. In fact, some of them had to be 100 had to be exactly right. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't have the function unless maybe 100 plus are right.
Right.
So the probability, I've actually been very kind to the evolutionists in my probability calculation, very generous to them.
Yeah. So probability, that's what Matt was saying. The probability theory is against the theory of evolution.
Oh, yeah. On most levels. Well, I was going to address this also. You made a great point. There were some atheistic scientists who argued recently, some MIT guy, that there's a mathematical way that we could figure out how a strand of RNA could find itself falling together and stuff like that. But you made a very good point in the video talking about how we get RNA and how it's dependent on other things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because RNA is an extremely complicated molecule. It has building blocks, and the building blocks are composed of three building blocks, sub-building blocks of their own. The thing is, all those building blocks are unstable, especially over geological time. The longer time you have, the more time you have to break things down.
Yeah.
And then underwater, these things don't come together, they actually fall apart. And then you may have realized this video was produced. The Nobel Prize for Chemistry was awarded last year, showing that DNA is incredibly unstable, which means you need loads of repair machines to overcome the chemical damage. You see, your cell, every one of your cells has about 1 million base damages every day. So 1 million letters in each of your cells are damaged every day, but they're repaired. Otherwise, you'd be a mutated mess really quickly. Now, RNA is actually far less stable than DNA, but the Nobel Prize last year was awarded for DNA instability. So the idea of DNA or RNA forming in a primordial soup is a preposterous nonsense.
Preposterous. That's a good word.
Oh, yeah.
Good pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Dr. Sarfati and Matt Singleton. Tune in again next week for the rest of the news.